Welcome to day 6 of No Shave November, aka the itchy phase. What do you guys think though? What's up YouTube, Jason here with Byte My Bits. In today's video, I'm talking about a different brand of NAS than I normally talk about. That's right, no Synology today. Instead, I am talking about the QNAP TS-x53D. Of course, huge shout out to QNAP for sending this device over to me. This has been kind of an interesting thing, and I'm excited on a couple different reasons here, but let's talk about it, shall we? Before I jump into what I think though, let me give you those specs. The TS-x53D comes in at a 2, a 4, or a 6 bay option. It runs a Celeron J4125 CPU that is a quad-core 2 GHz processor that does boost up to 2.7 GHz. It has a PCIe Express 2.0 expansion slot. The basic version comes with 4 gigs of RAM, but it can handle up to 8 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. It does support SSD caching, which QNAP does offer an expandable PCI card for that. On the back, it has an HDMI 2.0 port that outputs 4K video up to 60 Hz. In total, it has 3 USB 2.0 ports and 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports. Now, the PCI Express expansion slot does allow you to add a few interesting things. Most of the basics are covered, like an NVMe SSD cache, for example. You could also add a 5/10 gigabit NIC to it. So if you aren't happy with the speeds this thing comes with, which I'm going to touch base on here in a second, you can always upgrade that as well. You can even get an AC2600 wireless card to add into this if you truly want to run this thing wirelessly, which, you could. And last but not least, they even have a Thunderbolt add-on to where if you want to use this for like storage and you want to connect to high-speed drives, you can do that as well. So neat. Now the QNAP TS-53DX for me was interesting primarily because it sets a new standard that I am much more excited about than regular networking. I'll tell you why. Basically, this QNAP comes stock with two 2.5 gigabit per second NICs. That is a total of 5 gigabits per second transfer speeds with port trunking, load balancing, etc. if you wanted to on the back. That, to me, is very interesting. 1 gigabit networking has been a standard for so long. I think it was invented in sometime in like 1832 or something like that. Yes, I know that's sarcastic. Calm down. The point is, 1 gig networking is good for everyday usage, but the big jump past that is usually 10 gig, which is a huge investment for some people, especially if you're like me and you really want that RJ45 connection or, the standard Ethernet cable. If you want that, sometimes you're gonna have to pay through the nose for it. Not to mention, with 10 gig networking, there's a huge chance that you're not going to be able to take full advantage of that connection. I say this from personal experience, usually only getting anywhere between 4 to maybe 6 gigabits per second read and write between my main computer and my server. Yes, there's some tweakings here, there's some different things. I am not a network guru, so of course there's probably something I did wrong here, but overall, it's like having a car that can do 300 miles an hour, but the speed limit is, 150. Your mileage may vary, of course. Moving on. So that's where we get 2.5 gig networking, which has been interesting to me because a few different reasons. One, 2.5 does not create as much heat as 10 gig does. If you guys have any well-built 10 gig cards, a lot of them have some pretty beefy, passive cooling heat sinks. Some of them even come equipped with a fan. That's because 10 gig can get hot, especially when you use it to its fullest capacity. And number two, 10 gig is just mostly expensive. Yes, you can get a bunch of like recycled enterprise gear, stuff that companies are getting rid of because they're upgrading to super pricier versions of whatever they have, but it's just on a general scale expensive. Well, that's where we get 2.5 gig networking, and why I'm excited is because look at this thing, right? No big heat sinks, no expensive design. This thing doesn't cost that much. You can upgrade literally your network speeds 2.5 times faster than the standard 1 gig networking, which is amazing. That is a huge bump, and I don't think everybody needs 10 gig networking. I want 10 gig networking on everything, but I don't think everybody can even utilize 10 gig networking. So why pay the extra cost for something that can go 300 miles an hour if you're only going to be able to get like 100 miles per hour out of it, if you know what I mean. This is actually a QNAP NIC. This is something that they sent to me for my testing. It was something that I requested because I have a 10 gig networking setup. I have a big switch. Unfortunately, my switch specifically does not handle a 2.5 or a 5 gig connection. It only goes from 1 to 10. That's it. So when I plug something like this in that has a 2.5 gig NIC, it just doesn't recognize it and it goes down to 1 gig per second. And that's where we have this. Again, QNAP has a bunch of different options, but they sent this one over for me. This is a 5-port. One of the ports going to be used to connect to the rest of your network. So 4 ports that you can hook up 2.5 gig connected devices. This one has 2. So if you use both of them to plug into this, then, obviously you're going to be 2 down. But that was really the reason why I was kind of excited about this, because to me, this brings in what I feel like should be a new standard across just about everything out there. No, every computer out there does not need 10 gig networking, but if we start seeing every single motherboard coming at least stock with a basic 2.5 gig / 1 gig compatible NIC, just our overall speed would increase locally on devices that can now easily take advantage of those kinds of speeds. And just in case it doesn't come stock with it, you can always get a cheap option that doesn't take a lot of power, doesn't require a high-end PCI slot, nothing like that. That's still going to give you that 2.5 times speed increase in your main computer. 2.5 gig networking, I feel like, needs to be a new standard. Having something like this to get you started, especially in a basic home network where you just want to add, some good storage, bunch of different apps, whatever you want to do with a NAS like this and have that kind of a speed boost, to me is a big deal. And since I'm talking a lot about the speed boost, let's talk about the numbers that I got, which really I kind of pushed it based off the SMB overhead that I get just copying a file to and from the NAS. I was getting around 275 to 250 megabytes per second, which is 2.2 to 2.24 gigabits per second while writing to the array. Now, reading from the array, I did get a little bit of a slower speed. We're talking about 270 to 275 megabytes per second read, or 2.16 to 2.2 gigabits per second, respectively, which is right there on the limit of what 2.5 can do, especially if you consider the SMB overhead. But either way, with the RAID 5 setup that I have right now, which, by the way, it's 4 Seagates, with the RAID 5 setup that I have in here now, I was able to max out that 2.5 gig connection. And I know you guys might not believe me, because I am pretty much hardcore sold on Western Digital. I've said it a few different times, but believe it or not, I am actually using Seagate Iron Wolf drives. And believe it or not, even more, I requested them. So thank you, Seagate, for sending these drives over. I know I've been critical in the past, but I'd like to think that I'm evolving. And because my Seagate wounds are so old, I haven't had a chance to really test long-term any of your new drives. I decided with this review, because I'm going to put this thing to work after I'm done with this review. With this review, I want to give these Iron Wolf drives a fair chance. So, thank you, Seagate, Iron Wolf, NAS built, green. Put that back in there. With networking aside, my next focal area is going to be Plex. Of course, I love all the Plex things, and this thing can definitely handle some Plex. Now, the Celeron processor included does have hardware acceleration. That means that this little powerhouse quad-core 2 gigahertz processor can definitely crank out some transcoded streams. I didn't test direct streaming because I don't really care about that. Most devices, including things like a Raspberry Pi, could do direct streaming just fine. Transcoding is where it's at. If you guys missed it, I did review a very expensive Xeon-based Synology NAS that could, if I remember right, only handle I want to say 9 transcodes. I'd have to reference my video, but I'm going to go with 9 transcodes. That's a 1080p Back to the Future movie going all the way from 18 megabits per second all the way down to 2 megabits per second. I ran that same exact test on this, and because this thing handles hardware acceleration, it was able to transcode 11 streams, 1080p streams, 11 of them, which is pretty darn good, especially when you consider the price point of this NAS. By the way, links are in the description down below. Overall, it's going to hover around that $500 range, which for a small device that can crank out 11 Plex transcoded streams, that to me is good. But Jason, you can build your own Plex server cheaper. That's not what you're getting with this. You're getting a small device that's low power, has a bunch of built-in apps, easy to use, and stable, okay? You get what you pay for. Surprisingly enough, this thing can even handle 4K streams, which I figured it could do at least one, but no, it did two. I almost thought I was going to get 3 out of the dang thing, but unfortunately, 2 4K transcoded streams is about its max. Although you should never transcode 4K streams until Plex fixes the HDR to SDR tone mapping. I'm just saying, throwing that out there, moving on. So of course, Plex performed phenomenally, and believe it or not, like initiating those transcoded streams up around that 9-ish area streams, it was actually very fast to get those streams going. Anything like 10 and 11 took a little bit to kind of get established, but 9 was a super solid number and very responsive. But moving past that, something that I want to talk about, bear in mind, this little thing can do so much. It's really hard for me to pick and choose the things that I want to focus on because on a software side, this thing offers so much, just kind of depending on what you want to accomplish with your NAS. But something that I wanted to talk about is this thing has an HDMI output that can do 4K at 60 Hertz. So when I saw that, I'm like, hey, sweet, this could be a Plex client, right? I mean, you could be a server and a client just sitting in your own home entertainment area and just, right? Unfortunately, that's not a thing. I did run it and it did technically boot up into like the screen, but Plex is not an option when you're connecting to this. So moving forward, QNAP, if you are going to add any apps to that screen, it would be kind of nice to add Plex to that screen. They got a bunch of built-in apps, but they didn't work right off the bat. And there were some other things to enable to get those working. And just to be completely honest with you, I was very unmotivated to get that working because it didn't really fit into the whole Plex thing that I'm excited about. I was able to plug in a keyboard and a mouse just like a regular computer and use that system. You could go into things like Chrome or Firefox, Facebook, etc. And you can use this like a little miniature computer connected to your TV if you wanted to. And if you wanted to, you could probably use the built-in music player apps, video apps, stuff like that. It's probably not going to be nearly as advanced as Plex, but those are options that you can use. So the HDMI port was exciting. It would be even more exciting if it handled Plex. And that brings me to the software. Now, QNAP uses their own version, of course, of software to run everything here, and that is the QTS. I was running version 1.4.5. Now, QTS has all of the basic functionality you would expect from a NAS. Things like easy access to your settings, configurations, an app store where you can install, recommended or just kind of predefined, tested apps that QNAP has already went through. Which, by the way, the whole Plex Media Server, totally a partner with QNAP. They totally flaunt that. Super easy to install and get up and running. So, not even a big deal. But a ton of features, not necessarily app names, are familiar. Like they have a hybrid backup sync, HBS, that allows you to do snapshots of all the computers on your home network. Again, not something that I set up, but it is a huge deal for most people who want to back up their stuff. I already have a Synology with a much larger capacity capable of handling what I would actually need to back up on my home network, handling all those backups. But HBS does offer that after you get it installed to get all those backups and snapshots of the things that you want to back up and make sure you don't lose. You could also do virtualizations. Now, this came with 4 gigabytes of RAM. It can be expanded up to 8. I did not get into virtualization because aside from when I take this to work, here in a second I'll talk about that, but aside from wanting to run like a Pi-hole system on this, I didn't really have anything that I wanted to virtualize. And I was using a majority of the RAM for some interesting features that I can't wait to play with more, to be honest. So Surveillance Station, Synology has this too. Surveillance Station allows you to add cameras and that way it's always recording, has, triggers, motions, apps, everything you can do on your phone, etc. It's a really robust system. It's not like as hyper fast as, my Ryzen build that I built just for Blue Iris, of course, but it is very good at what it does. And the cool thing with QNAP, unlike Synology, QNAP offers 4 licenses. Synology only offers 2. With Synology, you have to purchase anything over 2, and I think they're like $60. Gotta be honest, I don't know how much QNAP is, but there's no way it could be over 60 bucks, I would guess. But you get 4 cameras to start off with, which is a pretty good little starter pack. But the surveillance station itself, it works, it's functional, there's nothing new and exciting about that. But what is exciting is something called QVR face recognition, which I cannot wait to play with more, because this software has the ability to analyze people's faces on camera and like record when they showed up in camera and count it and give you little snapshots of when it recognized their face. Now, this is super interesting technology to me. And when I'm done with this, because of the way the whole 2.5 does not integrate well with my 10 gig networking, and the 6 terabyte drives are bigger than the 4 terabyte drives I have at my work right now, I plan on taking this to work. So it's going to be used every single day to do backups on everything at work. And it's going to be used, like actually stressed at work. But on top of that, I want to make it to where the camera in our office starts recognizing faces and counting it. I tested it in my garage and I realized that you kind of sort of have to be close enough to the camera for it to recognize. My garage is way off an 11-foot ceiling, 15 feet away. So it didn't recognize it that well. I had to like get up on top of a ladder and basically stare at the thing for it to get that initial recognition of my face. But after I became an unrecognized person, I gave myself a profile and a name. And now anytime I walk in my garage, as long as I have this hooked up and running, it will run this like AI software in the background to analyze my face and identify who I am and then count how many times I came in there and when. Which I would love to give a more long-term, in-depth testing review on that software, but that actually is recommended to have 8 gigs of RAM. This one only has 4 gigs of RAM. So I'm not gonna be pushing it too hard. I just wanted to get up and running testing. Also, I've had this thing for a very long time. I've been kind of pushing it off because of the garage and other things. So sorry, QNAP, thank you for being patient. And that's all I can offer you at the moment. A very interesting built-in technology that you can install for free and just count how many people are coming through whatever. So overall, what do I think about the QNAP TS-x53D? Overall, I think that this thing at its price point hits a home run. I feel like if you can knock out anything close to 10 streams with a $500 system with Plex, then that's a pretty good system build overall and can really accommodate most home users if you're using this for something like Plex. If you're willing to sacrifice a few of those streams and then dedicate some other things like the surveillance station, for example, to, archive all of that video footage and security camera footage that you might have routed throughout your house or your small business, then you can definitely do that as well. Again, at this price point, it's only a quad-core 2 gigahertz processor, but the hardware accelerated transcoding on Plex boosts it phenomenally. That hardware acceleration is key here. And that alone, I feel, makes this thing worth its money. Another thing is, and I've been kind of on the fence with this before, I like it. I see the pros and cons both ways, but this thing has an external power supply. And in my experience, not personal experience, but what I've heard from other people and on the internet, stuff like that, is if you have like let's say a Synology NAS or any kind of a NAS that has a built-in power supply, something that's built right into the box, and all you need to do is plug it into the wall like you would a regular computer. If that goes down, then most of the time you have to send in the entire system to get it serviced. So on one end, it's like, hey, it's more compact, it's easier to use, you don't have a brick floating around, it's convenient. On the other hand, if it does go bad, you're completely out a NAS unless you tear it down yourself or send it in, etc. Whereas having an external brick, if this thing fails, you just get another brick. You might be down for a couple days, but you just get another brick. Or if you're really smart, you get ahead of the curve and order a spare one. Not saying you're gonna need it, I'm just saying in general, power supplies on these little devices, kind of sort of what I think of as the first thing to go. So guys, if you wanna learn more about this, I'm taking this to work. This is gonna upgrade my home network, 2.5 gig switch that's going to be able to make the communication between my main work PC and this much faster. You can check all of these out in the Amazon affiliate links down below. I really do believe that a setup like this is an easy and a cheap way to upgrade your network and get 2.5 times the speeds that you are normally used to. So thank you QNAP for sending this over for review. Thank you Seagate for sending the hard drives over for testing. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, post those in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and have yourself a great day.